Translation. Such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure or external objects, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. Translation with repetition. Such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure or external objects, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. Sri Yamunacharya, a great devotee in Krishna consciousness, said, Yadavadhi mama cheta Krishna padaravinde nava rasa dhamna dhamanudyatya rantum asit tadavadhi bata nari sangame smaryamane bhavati mukha vikaraha sushtu nishtivanam cha. Since I have been engaged in the transcendental loving service of Krishna, realizing ever new pleasure in him, whenever I think of sex pleasure, I spit at the thought and my lips curl with distaste. A person in Brahma Yoga or Krishna consciousness is so absorbed in the loving service of the Lord that he loses his taste for material sense pleasure altogether. The highest pleasure in terms of matter is sex pleasure. The whole world is moving under its spell, and a materialist cannot work at all without this motivation. But a person engaged in Krishna consciousness can work with greater vigor without sex pleasure, which he avoids. That is the test in spiritual realization. Spiritual realization and sex pleasure go ill together. A Krishna conscious person is not attracted to any kind of sense pleasure due to his being liberated soul. Thus ends the Transcendental Bhakti Vedanta purport. Om Ajnanatimmirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyat Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So in this section of chapter 5, we have been looking from the last class. In the last class, this verse was discussed in combination with 5.20. Now, these two verses are describing the characteristics of a liberated soul, of a person who is self-realized. In the previous verse, we saw that a person who neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant or laments upon obtaining something unpleasant, who is self-intelligent, unbewildered, and who knows the signs of God, is to be understood as already situated in transcendence. So in the previous verse, some of the symptoms that were mentioned was he neither rejoices upon achieving something, neither laments upon obtaining something unpleasant. So in both the situations, both pleasant and unpleasant, he doesn't waver either through rejoicement or through lamentation. Further, he knows the signs of God, and who is self-intelligent and unbewildered. So he is never bewildered by any situation. Neither he is lacking knowledge about the self. So these are some of the characteristics that were mentioned in the previous verse about the person situated in transcendence, or one who is liberated. Continuing that, this verse, which is 5.21, is also talking about few other symptoms which are demonstrated by a person who is self-realized. In some ways, the 5.20, 5.21 is connected, and in some other ways, 5.21 and 5.22 are also connected. So this very first word, Bahya Sparsheshu. So the word sparsha means touch. As we'll see in the next verse also, this word will be used. And we can see here, Bahya refers to external, and sparsha refers to touch. So usually in the material world, the senses of the living entity are always engaged with other external, bahya, sparsha, touch objects. So they are in touch with external objects. And what does these senses? These senses which always require some real engagement. That's the nature of the senses, that they need some engagement. And the way the person, the reason why a person engages his senses with external sense objects is because there is a certain sense of a feeling of happiness or pleasure that one tries to derive out of this contact of the senses with the external sense objects, the external touch, the bahya sparsha. So when these external, the senses are in contact with an external object, one finds happiness or some sort of pleasure. But here it is being said that the condition of a liberated person or a self-realized soul is that asakta atma. As Prabhupada mentions in different places, the word atma can refer to the mind, body, or the soul. And Prabhupada says this word atma here can refer to all three. Prabhupada means that he is not asaktatma, one who is not attached or attracted to the external sense objects or sense pleasure. So both in body, mind, and spirit or soul is not interested in or not attracted or not attached to these external sense objects. So this is a test of a person who is liberated, who is self-realized. He is no more interested in his body. He is not trying to grab sense objects and seek pleasure in them. Neither in his mind he is trying to think of sense objects and get some pleasure out of it. And neither spiritually he is trying to do some things and gain some material benefit which can satisfy his senses. No. In all these three levels, Prabhupada says that he is not at all attached or attracted to the external sense objects. Vindati Atmani Yat Sukham. So Vindati refers to enjoys, Atmani within the self. And how does he get happiness if he's not getting happiness from outside? With the contact of the sense pleasures, how is he finding happiness? He's satisfied within the self. And how is that is happening? We'll see little in the next line. So, Sabrahma Yoga Yuktatma, because he's concentrating upon the Supreme. And because of that, he's obtaining Sukham. He's not enjoying the normal way the materialist enjoys, but he's enjoying in a different way, and that way is by concentrating on the Supreme. And Sukham Akshayam Ashnute. So Sukham, again, pleasure, happiness. Akshayam, Prabhupada translates this as unlimited, as we will also see this word a little further. And the quality of happiness of a person who is liberated is very, very different from a person who is not liberated. And Ashnute also refers enjoys. So you can see there is a distinction between how a normal person enjoys and how a self-realized person enjoys. And so let us try to look more carefully into this verse. So such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure or external objects, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. So it is important to know that, as Prabhupada always says, there are do's and don'ts. So it is very important to know both of them, as what a self-realized person does and does not do, because in that way, we can also understand as what we should do and what we should not do. So here it is being said, not attracted to material sense pleasure or external objects. Although we cannot do this artificially, we will see how a devotee does this. But here it is being said that if we are attracted to material sense pleasure or external objects, that means we are not yet situated in our real position. We are not still deriving the pleasure within, the spiritual pleasure. And it is being said the quality of the happiness that is derived in the normal way and the way a self-realized person sees or enjoys happiness is very different. So in the case of a self-realized person, the kind of happiness that he enjoys is unlimited happiness. And why is that? Why does he obtain that kind of happiness? Because he concentrates on the Supreme. So let's try to understand this little more as what is this kind of happiness that one is finding. And very soon we see in the purport Srila Prabhupada is actually quoting Yamunacharya, a great devotee in Ramanujacharya Sampradaya. Prabhupada often quotes him to bring in various points, and especially this verse, Prabhupada quotes quite often. And here it is being said about how, so Prabhupada is in the very beginning bringing up this point that the whole world is moving under its spell, and its, Prabhupada is referring to sex pleasure. So Prabhupada very soon in the beginning is mentioning that the highest pleasure in terms of matter is sex pleasure. The whole world is moving under its spell. And the materialist cannot work at all without this motivation. So Prabhupada, as we see that in this translation, Prabhupada is mentioning that a self-realized person that is not attracted to sense pleasure or material pleasure. And Prabhupada is referring here to sex pleasure. Now, why Prabhupada is bringing this aspect of sex pleasure particularly? Because this is the highest that one can have in the material realm, in the material pleasures that one can have. The usual understanding is that the sex is the highest. And therefore, Prabhupada is trying to decipher what this is and how a devotee sees it and how a devotee avoids it. So let's go a little further and see the translation a little more before we come to the purport again. So this word Bahya Sparsheshu is very important. So especially with a lot of technology available today, there is so much of immediate contact that we can have with various music, various television or YouTube, and with different restaurants and different eating spaces, there are different places to enjoy. The whole material world means they're propagating these 5 things and the objects which give pleasure to these 5 objects. So Bahya Sparsheshu. So this is the most common way in which one is trying to find happiness. And a person who is a devotee, who is Krishna conscious, he is Bahya Sparsheshu Asaktatma. He is not taking pleasure in this. As we also see, the Supreme Lord Prabhupada mentions, is all spiritual, and therefore he never takes any pleasure in matter. That's why the Supreme Lord is always aloof. He is always enjoying spiritual rasas, spiritual tastes, spiritual exchanges with his devotees in the spiritual world, but he's never enjoying anything material. And Prabhupada says that similarly, a devotee who is in contact with the Supreme, who has realized his real position, he also does not take enjoyment in matter. He may engage what is necessary in the service of the Lord, but he doesn't try to enjoy those for one's own self. And there was a wonderful example of Ramananda Raya, who was bathing women so that they can be performing the dance for Lord Jagannath. But at the same time, although he was in contact with the so-called external object, but he was asaktatma. He was not at all attracted, not at all attached to any of them. Rather, the perception was that, oh, this is for the service of Lord Jagannath, and therefore I'm just acting on behalf, and everything is meant for the enjoyment of Lord Jagannath. So devotees, this is a very important quality for devotees, that Bahya Sparsheshu Asaktatma. There is no attachment, no attraction for this external sense objects. This should be one of the tests. So this verse is also giving us various tests which we need to apply upon ourselves to see where are we. How much when we come in contact with another sense objects that we are getting attracted to, and how much are we getting detached. And Prabhupada often gives this example of a hungry man. When a person who is completely fed, who is completely satisfied from hunger, Even if one gives something little more, he says, no, 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 I just had my breakfast. I don't want anything more. I'm satisfied. So similarly, until unless we are not satisfied spiritually, this asaktatma, this distaste for material pleasure will not come. So this is a very important test that we all need to check in our life, that how much am I developing this asaktatma for the bahya sparsheshu. Then it is also important to see the second line of this verse, which says, Vindati Atmani Sukham. So, so the way a devotee enjoys is by spiritual method. And the happiness that is derived out of spiritual means is very, very different. And we'll just briefly look at this word called akshayam. So Prabhupada translates this as unlimited. In other places, Prabhupada also says that it means not flickering. So Prabhupada says that in the material world, people are working very hard, and the happiness that they derive is very, very flickering. And Prabhupada even says about the sex happiness that it is so limited, so fickle, so limited for just few minutes. What is in there? And Prabhupada often quotes about example of people in Paris, the big politicians, big people going to the bar, nightclubs, and trying to enjoy something for a few minutes. Prabhupada says, this is not the real quality of happiness that a human being can attain. And therefore, Prabhupada also says, the word akshayam also means not deteriorating. So Prabhupada means that the happiness, the real quality of happiness means it should be unlimited happiness. And Prabhupada also quotes that, as we'll see in the next verse, this verse is quoted again. So, Ramante yogino anante. So the real yogis, the real devotees, they are not endeavoring for any kind of happiness which is flickering or deteriorating, because they understand that the soul is eternal, and therefore the quality of happiness that the soul is seeking is also eternal. But unfortunately, because of being, as we saw even in the morning, that one mistakenly thinks oneself to be the gross body or the subtle body. And therefore, one tries to seek happiness which are pertaining to both the gross and subtle bodies, but both of the gross and subtle bodies being temporary, the happiness that is sought through them is also temporary, flickering and deteriorating. But one who is self-realized, he knows that his real self is different from these two things. And therefore, he recognizes that my quality of happiness should not be of this quality, but it should be of different quality, which is unlimited, which is Satyananda, which is real happiness, not false happiness, which appears there for some time and vanishes after some time. That is not the quality of happiness one must seek. So this is very important realization a devotee must carry, that what kind of happiness am I seeking? Where am I going? What am I doing? Why am I trying to do this? Why am I trying to do this? Am I trying to find some flickering happiness? Or am I trying to recognize that my real position is to find real happiness? Am I doing that? And there is another verse Prabhupada often quotes in order to state that people becomes very agitated very soon. And especially in terms of whenever there is some disturbance, people become very, very much agitated, distressed. But Prabhupada says that one should become a dhira. Dhira means one who is sober. And what does a sober man do? Matras parshastu kaunteya sitoshna sukha dukkhada agama paino nityas tam sitikshva bharata. Now, who is a dhira? So Prabhupada also says that dhira is one who is a devotee, who is situated in real happiness. Because his source of happiness is from spiritual happiness, recognizing that this material world is temporary, it is flickering, there will be distress and there will be some happiness, that both will come. But one who is dhira, one who is situated in real happiness, he is not disturbed by these things which are coming and going. So Prabhupada says this is another test of a devotee, another test of a spiritual realized soul. How is he dealing with both the sukha and dukkha which is appearing in the material world? Is he distressed sometimes? Is he rejoicing? No. He is just like Prabhupada gives this example, Prabhupada says that just like there is snowfall, Prabhupada was giving some lecture and he says that there is snowfall now and the snowfall will go away and again the snowfall will come. So Prabhupada is saying no one is so much worried about it is coming and it's going on its own. So similarly in our life, there will be some sukha and some dukkha, both will come and both will go. But because this is ephemeral, because this is short-lived, this is temporary, the devotee does not pay too much attention to this. Rather, the devotee is looking at the eternal aspect of living, the eternal sky, the eternal world, and the eternal happiness that one can derive through the eternal spiritual process. And therefore, Prabhupada says that one should try to not become agitated by the so-called ups and downs of material life. And it is very important that one recognizes the temporariness of all these aspects of life, which is driven by our past karma and the kala, guna karma. Because of past things that we have done, some things will come, but they should not distress or make us any less focused on our real goal, real aim of life. So this quality of happiness is another test as how are we getting happiness in this life. Then it is important, as we see in the very beginning, so maybe before I go here, it is also important to quote the verse of Rishabhadeva in this connection about real happiness. So Rishabhadeva, I'll just share my screen. Sorry, 1 second. Yes. So Rishabhadeva, when he's instructing his son, he is giving this wonderful instruction. Rishabha uvacha nayam deho deha bhajam nirloke kastan kaman arhate vidbhujame tapo divyam putrakayena sattvam shuddhyed yasmad brahma saukhyam tu anantam. So here he's instructing his 100 sons, Rishabhadeva, and he's saying deha bhajam, one who has obtained a human form of life or a material body. In this world, one should not endeavor for troublesome kastan, kaman, arhate, vidbhujame. So one who is just trying to work day and night for sense gratification, he is being compared here to dogs and hogs, which also get similar pressure of sense gratification in larger quantity perhaps because they unrestrictedly engage in sex life. Prabhupada often tells hogs they do not discriminate who is their mother, sister. They engage in indiscriminate sex life. And Rishabhadeva is saying that should not be the goal of life. That should not be the real activity of a human being who has been awarded this body. Rather, one should tapo devyam putraka ena sattvam. So we saw the word sattvam in the morning, one of the verses. So the sattvam, our existence has to be purified. And how is that purified? Here it is being mentioned by tapo devyam putrakayana, by taking austerity. Austerity means to take activities which help one advance in spiritual life, voluntarily to take those activities and give up other activities which do not help us to get progress, which does not help us to be progressive in our spiritual life. Now, when sattvam shuddhyet, when one's existence becomes purified, then one can experience Brahma Saukhyam. So this spiritual happiness that one can obtain is only when one purifies one's existence. Until unless one does not purify one's existence, one cannot find this Brahma Saukhyam. So what is that purification of existence? Purification of existence means in the lower, in the impure state of existence, one is just trying to enjoy by eating, mating, sleeping, and defending. So this is the only means of enjoyment in the lower state of existence. But when one follows the instructions of a pure devotee and develops this muscle of austerity and engages in spiritual activities, then the existence is purified. And in that state, from that purified existence, one can experience the spiritual happiness. And that is very, very important to recognize that the happiness that we are deriving in all other means of socializing, in trying to get some material promotion, material qualifications, these are not the aims of life. And why this is so important, Prabhupada says in another place that until the reason why people are so engrossed in eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, because they do not know the real aim of life. That is to purify one's existence, to go back to the spiritual world. Because they do not recognize this aim of life, therefore they find other things pleasurable. But when one recognizes that the aim of life is different from this temporary things that I'm seeking, that's when one can endeavor with more attention and focus to find this Brahma Saukyam. So this is another important point to note, that in human form of life, one must make this extra endeavor to do activities which are meant for spiritual benefit. And another point that we see is that Prabhupada is bringing the aspect of sex life. So actually, according to the Varnashrama system, the householders are permitted to have sex. The brahmacharis, sannyasis, they abstain completely, and so does the vanaprastha. So in this period of life of householder, again, there are two classifications which are often mentioned. One is that of grihastha and the grihamedis. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, first chapter, there is further description about this grihasthas and grihamedis. The purport Prabhupada writes. And Prabhupada is writing that the grihasthas are those who live together with wife and children, but live transcendently for realizing the ultimate truth. So although sex is permitted in the householder's life, the goals of both of them are very different. One is living, Prabhupada says in one place that although grihasthas are those who understand everything clearly, but because they're not able to give up everything, they live together. They understand that this life is not meant for sense gratification. This life is meant for higher purpose. So they recognize, but they're not able to give up everything for that goal. So for them, there is permission. Okay, you can live together with family and children, but the aim, you're still following that central aim, that is to realize the ultimate truth, to serve the ultimate truth. So that is very clear in the lives of grihasthas. Whereas in case of the grihamedis, that aspect of life is completely missing. They do not recognize that the goal of life is self-realization. So their goal is completely different. And what is their goal? Their goal is to satisfy their own senses and the senses of the extended family. So Prabhupada in the purport writes that the grihamedis, however, are those who live only for the benefit of the family members, extended or centralized, and thus are envious of others. So this is the characteristics of grihamedi. One of the characteristics is that definitely they are not focused on self-realization. And because they're not focused on self-realization, what are they looking for? They are looking for the other benefits of themselves and their family members. And because they're trying to get something for themselves, when others get something, they become very unhappy. They become very envious. Oh, their things are being promoted. Their ideas are being promoted. Their family members are being promoted. They have got a car. So this immediately, because the attention is not to go towards the real goal of life, all other things means it starts with this the quality of enviousness. It does not have, so let us have a big house. Let us have this thing. Let us do this way. So Prabhupada is saying the word meti indicates jealousy of others. So this is another characteristic. In family life, it is very important that everyone is understanding that the goal of life is not to be worried about other people or other things. Rather, be focused on the aim of life for realizing the ultimate truth and engaging all resources, the house, the wife, the children, everyone together, coming together to perform Sankirtana and hearing the messages of pure devotee and reading, chanting. So when one engages in these things, only then one can be freed from jealousy and enviousness. Otherwise, there is no way one can be freed, because that urge is so high to protect one's own family members, to take care of them. And not only that, because there is such special attention or affectionate for one's own family, when others do well, there is a disturbance in the heart. So this disturbance, this abhadras cannot go away without one transforming oneself to the spiritual plane. And so then it is also important to recognize few more characteristics of sex life. So as we saw, the householders, the grihasthas, they are not focused on this enjoyment from the senses, but rather living in a restricted, in a regulated manner for the ultimate aim. So here, Yamunacharya is saying, this is said by Prahlad Maharaj about the characteristics of sex life. So here it is being said, Yanmaithunadi grihamedi sukham hituchham kanduya nena karayor iva dukha dukham tripyanti neha kripana bahu dukha bhajaha kandutivan manasijam vishaheta dhiraha. So this is a verse which is said by Prahlad Maharaj about the characteristics of sex life. And this is a very, very beautiful verse. And the translation goes like this. Sex life is compared to the rubbing of two hands to relieve an itch. So there is some happiness when there is an itch, when there is some skin problem or different itches. So one may itch to relieve that sensation of little, the itching sensation which is being felt in that space. If one is trying to itch, for a moment there is happiness. And the sex life is being compared to such kind of happiness that is derived from itching. Grihamedis, so-called grihasthas, who have no spiritual knowledge, think that this itching is the greatest platform of happiness, although actually it is a source of distress. So here, Prahlad Maharaj is saying that people think that this itching is the greatest platform of happiness. Actually, it is a great source of distress. So just like when one has skin disease, when one wants to itch, doctors advise don't itch, because if you itch, it will only aggravate the problem. It will only increase. So it is similarly the same thing Prabhupada is mentioning in different places, that if one is thinking that this is real happiness, one is only entangling oneself more and more in this material life. Because the material existence means it is binding with this tight knot of sex life. Because as long as that desire exists, one has to come back. Because the only way one can go back to the spiritual world is when one is able to give up all kinds of material desires. And therefore, it is very important for one to recognize that this is not the real platform of happiness. And it is further being said here, those people who are trying to find happiness in this way, they are said to be kripana. And what are they ending up into? They are ending up in different kinds of miseries because of one itch that they have. They are trying to satisfy. One is becoming more and more entangled in the material world. Whereas on the other hand, who are dhiraha, sober, can tolerate this itching and are not subjected to the sufferings of fools and rascals. As we will also see in the next verse of 5.22, that this is the quality of a person who is intelligent and sober. He recognizes consequences very clearly. He understands with knowledge. And he doesn't want to end up in miseries and sufferings and just enjoy temporarily right now, and tomorrow I end up in different miseries. So sometimes people think, in some way or other, I will do something right now. I do not care about tomorrow. No, every action comes with a consequence. And therefore, one should not be a kripana, but a brahman, a broad-minded man who can think not only for today, but also tomorrow, but in real sense, our eternal life. And on the other hand, one who does not able to see these things, he is, Prabhupada is saying in many different places, is nothing but fools and rascals. Because it is a great implication in the material world through sex life. So Prabhupada says that how can one overcome this itch? So just like doctor gives some ointment to put maybe that kinds of soothing something. So Prabhupada says that in order to overcome this impulse of sex indulgence or sex life, or in fact Prabhupada says even subtly thinking, reading about all these things of sex life, one can overcome only if one takes shelter of Madana Mohana. So Prabhupada says that the Cupid is shooting arrows, and by that one is getting attracted. Oh, man is thinking this female is very nice, the female is thinking this man is very nice, and therefore there is constant attraction among man and woman because of the Madana. But Prabhupada says only if one takes to the shelter of Madan Mohana, only if one is able to become Krishna conscious, one is able to keep Krishna in mind. As we saw in the last class, we saw the example of Haridas Thakur and the prostitute, who was sent by Ramchandra Khan. So Haridas Thakur was able to overcome this temptation or this attraction, asaktamanaha, asaktatmana, because of being Krishna conscious. So similarly, Prabhupada states that only if one can keep Krishna in mind, if one is becoming Krishna conscious completely, only then one can overcome the arrows of the Cupid. And as we also see, Prabhupada says that this is a test of our spiritual realization. So if you are more spiritually realized, then we will not be attracted to these temporary ephemeral pleasures, and especially the sex, which is the greatest. And Prabhupada says that the sex life is so difficult to give up. Prabhupada says that the hippies could give up so many material things, and they could just leave their rich families, they could leave rich cars and other facilities that their parents provided, but they could not give up the sex life. Because until unless one does not take to Krishna, it is not possible to give up this sex life. And Prabhupada also quotes examples of various, even Brahma and Shiva. Anyone in the material world or even the great sages, it is not possible to overcome this the strong impulse of sex until unless one doesn't become fully Krishna conscious, until unless one does not develop this higher taste for serving the Lord with all one's senses and getting the pleasure out of the spiritual engagement. If that is not there, one's energies, the senses requires real engagement. So Prabhupada says, if they're not really engaged completely in the service of the Lord, they immediately get misdirected to seek material happiness. So our whole idea should be to endeavor to engage all our gross body and subtle body, as we saw in the morning also. And the purport was mentioned that Archana, the worship of the Lord, is by which our gross body is being engaged completely in the service of the Lord, washing the arti plate, offering worship to the Lord, cleaning temple hall and things like that. And similarly, Prabhupada says by chanting, by thinking, by reading, by contemplating on the subject matter of the Vedic literatures, one can overcome these impulses or the energies which are being trying to be diverted in the material direction. They can be transferred to spiritual platform only by engaging these activities of reading, chanting, and worshipping, and so on and so forth. So without that, one cannot overcome the impulse of sex life. That is very important point we should all make, that we are always engaged, both in gross body and even this mind intelligence in the service of the Lord. Only by that one can overcome the sex impulse. Otherwise, it is not possible to overcome the attractions of the opposite sex. And there was one more point that I thought of bringing in. And okay, I'll stop here if there are any questions or comments.